All right, class, we are back, and we are talking about President George Washington today. We're talking about his biography. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Delaware Crossing. We're also going to talk about his presidency and what he did growing up, and that's what we're talking about today. George Washington, our very first president of the United States. So, what's he most known for? He was one of the most popular presidents of the United States. He's known for leading the Continental Army in victory over the British during the American Revolution, and he was also our very first president of the United States. He helped define what a president should be going forward. What is he most known for? One of the most popular presidents of the United States, George Washington, is known for leading the Continental Army in victory over the British in the American Revolution. He also was the first president of the United States and helped to define what the role of the president would be going forward. All right, so growing up, he grew up in colonial Virginia. All right, his father was a landowner. When he was just 11 years old, when George was 11 years old, fortunately, George had an older brother named Lawrence when his father died. And Lawrence took very good care of him, and he helped raise George and taught him how to be a gentleman. He got him educated. He got him subjects like reading and math. So he was taken good care of by Lawrence, who was his older brother after his father died. Growing up, George grew up in colonial Virginia. His father, a landowner and planter, died when George was just 11 years old. Fortunately, George had an older brother named Lawrence who took good care of him. Lawrence helped to raise George and taught him how to be a gentleman. Lawrence made sure that he was educated in the basic subjects like reading and math. All right. So when George turned 16, he went to work as a surveyor, and he took measurements of new lands and he mapped them out in detail. And a few years later, he became a leader with the Virginia militia. Okay, this is where he got his military start, and he was involved at the start of the French and Indian War. All right, he was there at the very first battle of the French and Indian War, to be exact. At one point in the war, he narrowly escaped when his horse was shot out from under him, but he did escape, and he went on to do great things. Growing up continued. When George turned 16, he went to work as a surveyor, where he took measurements of new lands, mapping them out in detail. A few years later, George became a leader with the Virginia militia and became involved in the start of the French and Indian War. At one point during the war, he narrowly escaped to death when his horse was shot out from under him. All right, so before the Revolution, after the French and Indian War, he settled down with Martha Dandridge Custis. All right, if you ever heard of Martha Washington, that's his wife. He's married to her for a long time. He took over the state of Mount Vernon after his brother Lawrence died, and he raised Martha's two children. They never had children of their own, but she had children from a previous marriage. And he became a large landowner, and he was elected to the Virginian legislature. Before the Revolution, after the French and Indian War, George settled down and married the widow Martha Dandridge Custis. He took over the estate of Mount Vernon after his brother Lawrence died and raised Martha's two children from her former marriage. George and Martha had never had their kids of their own. George became a large landowner and was elected to the Virginian legislature. All right. So before the war, the landowners were upset because they were passing taxes, and they was upset with the unfair treatment of the British rulers they did because they were having to pay all these taxes. So they began to argue and fight for their rights, and when the British refused, they decided they were going to go to war. Landowners upset. Soon George and his fellow landowners became upset with unfair treatment by the British rulers. They began to argue and fight for their rights. When the British refused, they decided to go to war. All right, the American Revolution and leading the army. He was one of Virginia's delegates at the First and the Second Continental Congress, and these representatives of each continent got together and they decided, hey, do we want to fight British or not, or the British or not? And in May of 1775, they appointed Washington as the general of the Continental Army. This was right as they were getting ready to go to war. The American Revolution and leading the army. George was one of Virginia's delegates at the First and Second Continental Congress. This was a group of representatives from each colony who decided to fight the British together. In May of 1775, they appointed Washington as general of the Continental Army. All right. So he was leading this army. He didn't have really trained soldiers, all right? not like the British did. Okay, he had farmers that he was having to teach to fight, but he managed to hold his army together even during tough times. For example, you got the crossing of the Delaware. Okay, it, it was a big victory and a turning point. You also had the final victory at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781 that he was a part of. Uh, but he managed to hold this army together. This army that was not as well trained as the British Army was, and it wasn't an easy task. Leading the army. General Washington did not have an easy task. He had a ragtag army of colonial farmers to fight trained British soldiers. However, he managed to hold the army together even during tough times and losing battles. Over the course of 6 years, George led the army to victory over the British. His victories included the famous crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas and the final victory at Yorktown, Virginia. The British Army surrendered in Yorktown on October 17, 1781. All right, so during his presidency, he served 2 terms. All right, and they were peaceful times during this time, and he established a lot of the roles, a lot of the traditions of being the president of the United States, and a lot of those still are here today, or they still stand today. And he helped build and guide the formation of the U.S. government. He was the first to appoint the presidential cabinet, which included his friends Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. And he did many different things as first because he was the very first president. Presidency. The 2 terms that Washington served as president were peaceful times. During this time, George established many roles and traditions of the President of the United States that still stand today. He helped build and guide the formation of the actual U.S. government from the words of the Constitution. He formed the first presidential cabinet, which included his friends Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury. So, how did he die? All right, just a few years after he left being president, he got a bad cold. All right, and his throat got infected. All right, he got very sick. His throat got infected, and he died on December the 14th, 1799, just a few years after he left being the president. All right. So, which number of president of the United States was George Washington? Was he A? Was he the first president, the 16th president, B, the 16th, or C, the 45th president? He was A. He was the very first president elected to be the president of the United States. We have a winner. Number 2, what war did Washington fight in before the American Revolution? Was it A, World War I, B, World War II, or C, the French and Indian War? It was the French and Indian War. He was actually there at the very first battle of the French and Indian War. Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. Number 3, who did George Washington marry? A, Marilyn Monroe, B, Martha Custis, or C, Mr. Sean's favorite, Selma Hayek? B, Martha Custis is who he married. Martha Washington would later be her name. She was very wealthy. She had lots and lots of money. So, number 4, what river did George Washington cross before the Battle of Trenton? A, the Delaware River, B, the Broad River, or C, the Nile River? It was A, the Delaware River is what the Washington, or the bridge, or the river that he crossed. It was icy, it was cold, it was on Christmas Day, and nobody was expecting that attack. So, but it was the Delaware River. Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. And number 5, how did Washington die? A, he had an ear infection. B, he had a throat infection. Or C, he had a lung infection. B, he had a throat infection. He got a cold. He got a throat infection of it and was not able to fight it off and died of the throat infection. Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. All right, that is all for Washington's biography. Be sure you go on Schoology. Go through here. Get credit for this. Turn it in. And I will see you back next time with, I'm not sure which one we got next in the American Revolution, but we will find out. But I will see you next time. You all have a good day.